Some stories aren't meant to be told, but this one needs to be heard. It started with something small, something almost unnoticeable, until it wasn't. Before we uncover the truth, make sure you're subscribed for more unforgettable stories. And if you enjoy mysterious twists, drop A in the comments. Here's what happened.
The auction house reeked of old money and desperation. Backstage, I stood in a white silk dress worth more than my father's last honest paycheck, listening to numbers called out like livestock prices. But here, the livestock was human. Hands trembling, I clasped them together tightly, fixating on that small pain instead of the terror about to unfold. Lot 47 sold for $200,000. Lot 48, the tearful girl beside me, went for $350. The auctioneer's voice was smooth and professional, as if selling art instead of souls. In a way, he was. We'd been groomed and displayed like masterpieces, our value set by youth, looks, and the whims of powerful, immoral men. My father did this, sold me to cover gambling debts to the Volkov Bratva, Russian criminals with roots deep in Boston. I saw his fear when suited men appeared at our apartment. But I hadn't known he'd see me as payment. He signed papers, transferring me as property, then looked me in the eye and said he was sorry, like that could cover what he'd done. Lot 49. My number. A handler whose name I never learned gripped my elbow, steering me through the curtain and onto the stage. Blinding lights obscured the audience, and only shapes and the glint of jewelry or glasses were visible. My legs moved automatically, a result of 3 days of forced preparation. Walk, stand, smile like you're grateful for this chance. I was 23 with a bachelor's in art history from a state school, earned on scholarships and loans. 3 months into my gallery job and building a life, my father's choices caught up with us. Now, on stage, I stood before men who saw me as an object to buy and use. Bidding started at $100,000. I forced myself to breathe slowly, hiding my panic. The auctioneer droned as the numbers climbed. 200, 3, 4. In the back, a paddle pushed it to 5, reducing my worth to math that meant nothing to these men. At $600,000, the bidding slowed. Only 2 paddles still moved, trading increments back and forth like a tennis match played with money instead of balls. I couldn't see either bidder clearly, just silhouettes against the stage lights. One was broad-shouldered, aggressive in his bidding, raising his paddle with sharp, angry movements. The other was calmer, more controlled, raising his paddle with minimal motion, almost casually. $700,000 from the aggressive bidder. $750 from the calm one. $800, his aggression clear in how he shot his paddle up. $850. The calm bidder spoke low and controlled. $1 million. The room fell silent. Even the auctioneer hesitated, his smoothness cracking. The aggressive bidder lowered his paddle. He'd been decisively outbid. $1 million. For me, going once. The auctioneer regained composure, voice sing-song. Going twice. My heart hammered so hard I wondered if it was visible through the thin silk. Sold to bidder 12. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. My fate was sealed. A handler led me through the corridors to a private room for finalizing transactions. I'd been purchased, bought, owned. The words echoed, each more surreal than the last. This was America, the 21st century. And yet, I waited to meet the man who'd just spent $1 million to acquire me. The door opened. A man entered, and every instinct I had screamed danger. He was tall, maybe 6'4", with the kind of build that came from actual violence rather than gym memberships. Dark hair cut with military precision, a suit that probably cost more than my entire year's salary at the gallery, and eyes so dark they looked black in the room's dim lighting. His face was all sharp angles and controlled expressions, handsome in a way that felt threatening rather than attractive. He examined me with the focused scrutiny of an art appraiser, searching for flaws or value. I held his gaze, refusing to look away even as instinct screamed to shrink and yield. If I were to be owned, I'd at least keep the dignity of eye contact. You're Alexis Bennett. His voice matched his appearance, deep and controlled, with an accent I couldn't quite place. East Coast, definitely, but refined in a way that spoke of money and education beneath whatever criminal empire he'd built. 23 years old with a degree in art history. Father is Richard Bennett, currently residing in a Bratva safe house until his debts are cleared. He'd done his homework. Of course he had. Men didn't spend $1 million without research. I managed a nod, not trusting my voice yet. He moved closer, circling me slowly, and I forced myself to stay still, to not flinch or cower. His footsteps were nearly silent on the carpet, predatory, calculated. My name is Dante Carver. I'm sure you've heard of me. I hadn't, but something in his tone suggested I should have. I run operations from Boston to Philadelphia, the territory that your father's associates have been attempting to infiltrate for the past 6 months. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, expensive and subtle. Buying you was a message to them. A demonstration of reach and resources. So I'm what, a trophy? The words came out steadier than I'd expected, anger finally cutting through the fear. Proof that you can afford to throw away $1 million on a person? Something flickered in his expression. Not quite amusement, but close. You're an investment. The Bratva values you at $600,000, the cost of your father's debt. I paid significantly more. That puts them in my debt, which is a position I prefer them to occupy. The clinical way he explained it made my stomach turn. You're a complication they no longer have to manage, and a reminder of who controls this city. And what happens to me now? I asked, my voice cracking slightly on the last word. What does $1 million investment entail? Dante's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, became more assessing. That depends entirely on you. The car waiting outside the auction house was exactly what I'd expected. Black, expensive, windows tinted dark enough that seeing inside was impossible from the street. A driver held the door open without making eye contact, and Dante gestured for me to enter first. I climbed in, the leather seats soft enough to feel like a luxury I had no right to anymore, and he slid in beside me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I was hyper-aware of his presence in the confined space. We drove through Boston in silence. City lights blurred past the windows. I'd lived here my entire life, but seeing it from inside this car with this man made everything feel foreign, threatening. Every familiar landmark took on new meaning, transformed by the context of my situation. The gallery where I'd worked was somewhere out there in the night. My coworkers probably wondered why I hadn't shown up for my shift 3 days ago. My apartment, tiny and overpriced but mine, held belongings I'd never see again. My life, such as it was, had ended the moment my father signed those papers. Where are we going? I finally asked when the silence became unbearable. Dante didn't look at me. His attention focused on his phone where he typed something with quick, efficient movements. My home. You'll stay there until I determine what to do with you. The casual way he said it, like I was a piece of furniture he hadn't decided where to place yet, made anger flare hot and bright in my chest. I'm not a thing. The words came out sharp, almost aggressive, and I braced for whatever consequences speaking to him that way might bring. You can't just determine what to do with me like I'm property. He did look at me then, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Legally, Alexis, that's exactly what you are. Your father signed documents transferring guardianship and rights to the Bratva, who transferred them to me in exchange for payment. In the eyes of the law, assuming the law even looked at this situation, you're my responsibility. Responsibility. The word was almost funny. I'm a human being with rights and autonomy. You can't actually own another person. This isn't the 1800s. A slight smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. You'd be surprised what's possible when enough money changes hands and the right people look the other way. But you're correct. I don't owe you in any meaningful sense. What I have is leverage over your father, a message delivered to the Bratva, and a complication I now need to manage. The way he framed it, all strategy and calculation, made me feel slightly less like an object and more like a problem to be solved. I wasn't sure if that was an improvement or a setback. What kind of complication? The kind that requires careful handling. He pocketed his phone, giving me his full attention. The Bratva will be watching to see what I do with you. If I'm too lenient, it suggests weakness. If I'm too harsh, it suggests I'm trying too hard to prove something. Either perception damages my position. So what's the right balance? I asked, hating that I cared about his strategic considerations, but I needed to understand what my immediate future looked like. That's what I'm determining. His expression remained neutral, unreadable. For now, you'll stay at my home under security. You'll have freedom within the property, but leaving without authorization isn't an option. Beyond that, we'll see. We'll see. Two words that somehow contained my entire future, undefined and terrifying. The car turned onto a private drive, passing through gates that opened automatically, and my breath caught as the house came into view. Estate would be more accurate, all stone and glass and architectural authority, lit from below in ways that made it look both beautiful and imposing. This was where men like Dante Carver lived, in fortresses disguised as homes. The car stopped in a circular drive. Dante exited first, then offered his hand to help me out. I ignored it, climbing out on my own, a small rebellion that probably meant nothing to him but felt significant to me. A woman appeared in the doorway, 50-ish, with the kind of composed efficiency that spoke of decades managing households for wealthy people. "Mrs. Chen will show you to your room," Dante said, already moving toward the entrance. "I have business to attend to. Breakfast is at 7. I expect you to attend. It wasn't a request." That much was clear. I followed Mrs. Chen into the house, through an entryway that could have held my entire apartment, past rooms furnished with obvious wealth but surprisingly good taste. Everything was coordinated without being ostentatious, expensive without being gaudy. This wasn't new money trying to prove itself. This was established wealth that didn't need to shout. "Your suite is on the 2nd floor," Mrs. Chen said as we climbed a staircase with wrought iron railings and marble steps. "Mr. Carver has instructed that you're to have everything you need. If there's anything specific you require, please let me know and I'll arrange it." Her tone was professional and neutral, giving no indication of what she thought about the situation or my presence. The suite she led me to was larger than my entire apartment had been. Bedroom with a king bed that looked like a cloud, sitting area with furniture that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years, bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, clothes hung in the closet all in my size, ranging from casual to formal. Someone had done extensive research, knew this was coming, and had prepared. "How long has he been planning this?" I asked, running my hand over a cashmere sweater that felt like touching air. Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Carver plans everything well in advance." "Is there anything you need right now? Food, perhaps, or something to drink?" I shook my head, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had been sustaining me through the auction and the drive was finally crashing, leaving me hollow and shaky. "Just sleep, of course." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Bennett, if I may offer advice, this household has seen many changes over the years. The best way to navigate them is with intelligence rather than emotion. Mr. Carver values capability above all else." She left before I could respond, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded final. I stood in the center of the suite, surrounded by luxury I'd never asked for, trying to process the past 48 hours. My father's confession, the men who'd come to collect me, the preparation facility where they'd kept us before the auction, teaching us to be appealing products, the stage, the lights, the numbers climbing higher and higher until Dante Carver's voice had cut through everything with an offer nobody could match. The bathroom mirror reflected someone I barely recognized. They'd done my makeup expertly, highlighting features I'd always considered ordinary, making me look like an expensive version of myself. The white silk dress clung in ways that felt invasive, designed to showcase rather than cover. I stripped it off with shaking hands, let it fall to the floor in a puddle of fabric that probably cost thousands, and stepped into the shower. The water was hot enough to burn, and I let it, standing under the spray until my skin turned red and the crying finally came. Not delicate tears, but ugly, wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. For my father's betrayal, for the life I'd lost, for the future. I couldn't see beyond tomorrow morning's required breakfast, with a man who'd bought me like I was art for his collection. I cried until there was nothing left, until the water ran cold, until I was empty of everything except exhaustion. The bed was as comfortable as it looked, and despite everything, sleep came quickly. I dreamed of auctions where the lots were paintings instead of people, where my art history degree meant something again, where I could walk into a gallery and see beauty instead of price tags measured in human suffering. Morning came with sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to cover, and for a blissful moment, I thought the previous day had been a nightmare. Then I opened my eyes fully and saw the unfamiliar room, the expensive furniture, the closet full of clothes I hadn't chosen, and reality crashed back with crushing weight. I was in Dante Carver's home. I was purchased at an auction, similar to a property. My father had sold me to cover his debts. None of it had been a dream. I forced myself out of bed, moving through the morning routine on autopilot. The bathroom was stocked with everything I could possibly need, all high-end brands, all unopened. Someone had thought of everything, anticipated every need, and prepared for my arrival with thorough efficiency. It should have felt considerate. Instead, it felt like proof of how carefully this had been orchestrated, how long Dante had been planning to acquire me. The closet held options ranging from casual to formal, and I chose deliberately. Dark jeans that fit perfectly, a simple black sweater, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what was necessary to look awake. If Dante wanted someone who looked like the girl from the auction, carefully packaged and presented, he'd be disappointed. If this were about demonstrating capability, as Mrs. Chen had suggested, I'd do it on my own terms. Finding the dining room required navigating hallways that all looked similar, but eventually I followed the scent of coffee and found my way. The room was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, with a table that could seat 8 but was currently set for 2. Dante sat at the head, reading something on a tablet, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He looked up when I entered, his dark eyes taking in my appearance with that same assessing quality from last night. "Good morning." He gestured to the chair at his right, not at the opposite end of the table, but close enough for conversation. "I hope you slept well as anyone could under the circumstances." I sat, accepting the coffee that Mrs. Chen poured without being asked. "Thank you for the clothes and amenities. I'm curious, though, how you knew my sizes. I'm thorough." He set down his tablet, giving me his attention. "Before I bid on you, I had my people gather information. Your measurements, your preferences, your background. I don't make million-dollar investments without research." The casual acknowledgement of the surveillance made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral. "And what did your research tell you? That you're intelligent, educated, and resourceful, given your financial limitations. That you worked at Beaumont Gallery, specializing in 19th century American art. You have student loans totaling $63,000 and were making payments consistently, despite barely covering your living expenses." He'd known everything about my life, had probably known more about my daily existence than I'd realized anyone was paying attention to. The violation of it settled in my stomach like lead. Why does any of that matter? Because it tells me you're not just a transaction. You're a person with skills and knowledge that could be useful. He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving mine. "I don't collect useless things, Alexis. Everything in my life serves a purpose. And what purpose do I serve?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended, anger seeping through despite my attempts at control. "Beyond being a message to the Bratva? That depends on what you're capable of." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying me with that unnerving intensity. "I have a problem that your expertise might help solve. I'm listening. Though I don't see how art history helps with organized crime." A slight smile touched his lips. "I've recently acquired a collection. 53 pieces, ranging from Renaissance to modern, were seized as payment for a debt. I need them authenticated, appraised, and prepared for sale through legitimate channels. My usual contacts are unavailable, and I need someone I can trust to be thorough and discreet." The request caught me off guard. Whatever I'd expected him to say, it wasn't this. "You want me to authenticate and appraise stolen art?" "Art acquired through legal debt collection," he corrected, though the distinction is perhaps academic. "The collection is currently housed in a secure facility. I need to know what I have and what it's worth. Your gallery specializes in 19th century American art. Several pieces in the collection fall into that category." I should have refused outright. Should have told him I wasn't going to help him profit from whatever criminal enterprise had generated this collection. But the practical part of my brain, the part that had learned to survive on limited resources, recognized opportunity. If I wanted any leverage in this situation, any chance at negotiating better circumstances, I needed to demonstrate value beyond the symbolic. "What do I get in return?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "For authenticating your collection?" His eyebrows raised slightly, something like approval flickering in his expression. "What do you want? Freedom. To leave here, to go back to my life, to not be owned by anyone." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm against his coffee cup. "Freedom isn't something I can give you. Not yet. Your father's debt to the Bratva was $600,000. They transferred that debt to me along with guardianship rights. Until certain political matters are resolved, releasing you would be interpreted as weakness. So I'm stuck here." The hopelessness of it tried to drag me under, but I forced it back. Then what can you offer? Better circumstances, he said simply. Your own space if you prefer, a salary for the work you do, and freedom to move within certain boundaries. You prove useful, prove trustworthy, and those boundaries expand. Eventually, when the political landscape shifts, we renegotiate. It wasn't freedom, but it was something more than being a prisoner in a gilded cage. I studied his face, looking for deception or hidden agendas, but his expression remained neutral, honest in a way that felt almost worse than lies. Why are you offering this? Why not just keep me locked up until I'm no longer politically relevant? Because I meant what I said. I don't collect useless things. He finished his coffee and stood. The collection is at a facility in South Boston. My driver will take you there this morning. Mrs. Chen has prepared appropriate clothing and supplies. You'll have 2 weeks to complete the authentication and appraisal. Demonstrate that you're as capable as my research indicates. He left before I could respond, his footsteps fading down the hallway. I sat alone at the breakfast table, processing what had just happened. Dante Carver had bought me for $1 million, brought me to his home, and was now offering me work. Real work, using skills I'd spent years developing, with compensation and gradually expanding freedom as incentive. It wasn't the rescue I'd fantasized about. It wasn't some heroic intervention that would return me to my old life. But it was a path forward, something I could do beyond simply existing as a symbol of his power. Mrs. Chen appeared with a leather portfolio. Everything you'll need for the authentication work is provided. Documentation, reference materials, tools. Mr. Carver has arranged for you to have full access to the collection and the facility. A security detail will accompany you, but they've been instructed not to interfere with your work. Thank you. I took the portfolio, feeling its weight, both literal and metaphorical. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you worked for him? 15 years. I managed his grandfather's household before that. The Carver family has employed me for nearly 3 decades. What's he really like? The question was probably inappropriate, definitely revealed more vulnerability than I wanted to show. But I needed to understand the man who now controlled my life. Is he as calculating as he seems? Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly, the professional mask slipping just enough to show something almost like fondness. Mr. Carver is many things. Calculating, yes. Strategic, always. But he's also fair in his way. He has rules, boundaries he doesn't cross, lines even his enemies respect. She paused, choosing her words carefully. His grandfather taught him that power without principle is just tyranny. Whether you believe he lives up to that teaching is something you'll have to determine yourself. She left me with that cryptic advice, and I sat alone with my coffee and my thoughts. Dante Carver was a criminal who operated outside the law, having participated in a human auction without apparent moral qualms. But he was also offering me work, providing a path toward something better than pure captivity. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. The facility in South Boston turned out to be a warehouse, nondescript from the outside, heavily secured on the inside. The security detail Mrs. Chen had mentioned consisted of 2 men in dark suits who introduced themselves simply as Marcus and James. They were polite, professional, and clearly there to watch me as much as protect me. The collection was housed in a climate-controlled section of the warehouse, each piece carefully stored and cataloged with basic information. The moment I stepped into the storage area and saw the collection, everything else faded into background noise. 53 pieces, Dante had said, and they were laid out with enough space between each to allow proper examination. Paintings mostly, but also several sculptures and what looked like decorative art pieces from various periods. My hands actually trembled as I approached the first painting, a landscape that might have been Hudson River School if it were authentic. I'd been working with art for years, first as a student, then as a gallery assistant, but I'd never had access to anything like this. These weren't the carefully curated pieces that passed through Beaumont Gallery with impeccable provenance and insurance documentation. These were raw acquisitions, pieces that had come from somewhere Dante didn't want to specify, requiring authentication before they could enter legitimate markets. Some were probably genuine, others might be excellent forgeries. My job was to determine which was which. I set up my workspace methodically, unpacking the tools Mrs. Chen had provided. UV light for examining varnish and underpaint, magnifying lenses for brushstroke analysis, reference materials for comparison, documentation for recording findings. Marcus and James positioned themselves near the entrance, far enough away to give me space but close enough to intervene if I tried something stupid like attempting to escape through a warehouse in South Boston with no phone, no money, and no idea where I was going. The landscape I'd noticed first was signed A. Bierstadt in the lower right corner, the signature matching Albert Bierstadt's known style. But signatures were easy to forge. I examined the canvas edges, looking for signs of age and wear consistent with 1860s production, checked the stretcher bars for period-appropriate construction, studied the brushwork under magnification, comparing it to authenticated Bierstadt pieces in my reference materials. 3 hours later, I was reasonably confident it was genuine and worth potentially $2 to $3 million if provenance could be established. I documented my findings in precise detail, photographing the piece from multiple angles, noting every observation that supported authentication. Dante wanted thorough and discreet, and I could provide both. The work absorbed me completely, letting me forget for hours at a time that I was doing this under duress, that my freedom depended on proving valuable to a man who'd bought me at an auction. By the time Marcus quietly informed me it was 6 o'clock, I'd examined and documented 8 pieces. 6 appeared genuine. 2 were likely forgeries, and collectively they represented somewhere between $15 and $20 million if my appraisals were accurate. The scope of it was staggering. Whatever debt had generated this collection, it must have been enormous. "Mr. Carver has instructed us to return you to the house for dinner," Marcus said, his tone respectful but firm. "You'll resume work tomorrow." I wanted to protest, to keep working, to lose myself in something that felt normal and purposeful. But the exhaustion was catching up with me, and I knew pushing too hard would lead to mistakes. I packed up my materials carefully, took a last look at the collection, and followed Marcus and James back to the car. The drive back to Dante's estate took 30 minutes through rush hour traffic. I watched the city pass by, thinking about the paintings I'd examined, the forgeries I'd identified, the value I'd calculated. This was real work, skilled work, using my education in ways that mattered. The fact that it was for a criminal enterprise was something I'd have to reconcile later. For now, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that the auction had tried to take away. Dante was waiting in his study when I arrived, working through documents at a massive desk that probably cost more than a car. He looked up when Mrs. Chen showed me in, setting aside whatever he'd been reading. "How did it go?" I gave him the honest assessment. 8 pieces examined. 6 appear genuine. 2 are likely forgeries. The genuine pieces include what I'm fairly confident is an authenticated Bierstadt landscape worth $2 to $3 million, a Winslow Homer seascape worth potentially $1 to $1.5 million, and 4 other significant pieces. The forgeries are good, professional work, but they don't hold up under detailed analysis. He listened without interruption, his expression remaining neutral, but I caught something that might have been satisfaction in his eyes. "You're certain about the forgeries?" "As certain as I can be without lab analysis of the paint composition and canvas aging. But yes, I'm confident in my assessment. The brushwork is incorrect, the craquelure is artificially induced, and the pigment choices contain anachronistic elements." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying me with that intensity I was starting to recognize. "You're good at this, better than I expected. It's what I was trained to do." I kept my voice level and professional. "Give me the full 2 weeks and I'll have complete documentation on the entire collection. What you do with that information is your business, but you'll know exactly what you have and what it's worth." "Fair enough." He stood, moving around the desk to lean against it, closer to where I stood. "You've earned some trust today, Alexis. Starting tomorrow, you'll have more freedom. No security detail shadowing you while you work. Access to a phone with monitored lines, and the ability to move around the property without restriction." The offer was more than I'd expected, and suspicion immediately rose. "Why, what changed?" "You proved you're serious about the work. I expect that you're not going to waste my time or resources." He crossed his arms, and the gesture made him look less like a crime boss and more like a regular person. "And because Mrs. Chen informed me that you look like you're about to break, and broken people don't do quality work, I need you to be functional, not traumatized." The blunt assessment should have offended me, but he was right. I was hanging on by a thread, maintaining composure through sheer stubbornness. "How considerate of you to care about my mental state," I said, not quite keeping the sarcasm out of my voice. "I care about results. Your mental state affects results. He pushed off from the desk, moving toward a bar cart in the corner. Drink? You look like you could use one. I should have refused. Should have maintained distance and professionalism. Instead, I heard myself say, "Whiskey, if you have it." He poured 2 glasses, handed me one, and gestured toward the leather chairs positioned near a fireplace. We sat in silence for a moment, and I took a sip, the liquid burning pleasantly down my throat. "Tell me about the Bierstadt." Dante's voice was genuinely curious, not commanding. "Why are you confident it's authentic?" "Because I've spent years studying his work. I fell into lecture mode without thinking, my brain grateful for familiar territory. Bierstadt employed distinctive techniques, including specific approaches to light and atmospheric perspective. His brushwork and foreground details versus background elements follows patterns that are difficult to replicate convincingly. The piece in your collection shows all the markers of his authentic work, plus aging consistent with the period. You love this. It wasn't a question, just an observation. Talking about art, analyzing it, understanding it. You love this work. I did love it. Had loved it since the first art history course I'd taken as an undergraduate, when I'd realized that paintings weren't just pretty pictures, but complex puzzles of technique and context and meaning. Yes, I admitted, it's the one thing I'm genuinely good at. Then you're fortunate. Dante swirled his whiskey, watching the liquid move. Most people struggle to find something they're good at and enjoy. They settle for competence in things that bore them. You have both skill and passion. That's rare. The almost philosophical turn of the conversation caught me off guard. This wasn't what I'd expected from a man who'd bought me at an auction. "You're not what I expected either," I said, before I could stop myself. His eyebrows raised slightly. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone crueler, maybe. Someone who'd treat me like property instead of having conversations about passion and purpose. Someone who wouldn't care if I broke as long as I was still useful." Cruelty is inefficient. He said it matter-of-factly, like stating a business principle. Fear might generate short-term compliance, but it doesn't produce quality work or long-term loyalty. My grandfather taught me that. He built this organization on the principle that people perform best when they're treated with basic dignity and given reasons to invest in outcomes beyond pure survival. Over the next week, a routine established itself with surprising ease. Mornings began with breakfast in that intimate dining room, where Dante and I would discuss my progress on the collection over coffee. He asked intelligent questions, demonstrating knowledge about art that seemed inconsistent with his criminal occupation, and I found myself looking forward to those conversations more than I wanted to admit. Then Marcus would drive me to the warehouse, where I'd spend 8 to 10 hours examining paintings, documenting findings, and building the comprehensive appraisal Dante had requested. The work was consuming in the best possible way. Each piece presented its own puzzle, its own set of clues to authenticate or disprove. A supposed Frederick Church landscape that turned out to be a skillful 20th century reproduction. A genuine and extraordinary Thomas Cole, probably worth $4 million to the right collector. A series of smaller Hudson River School pieces, some authentic and some not, requiring hours of detailed analysis to separate truth from forgery. True to his word, Dante had removed the constant security presence. Marcus dropped me off and picked me up, but while I worked, I was alone with the art. The freedom was intoxicating. I could think, could focus, could lose myself completely in authentication work without feeling watched and evaluated every moment. The phone he'd given me had limited functionality. All calls were monitored, as indicated by the message that appeared when I turned it on, but it still had access to the outside world. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. By the end of the first week, I'd completed a detailed analysis of 32 pieces. The collection proved to be a mixed bag, comprising roughly 60% genuine items and 40% forgeries, with the authentic works estimated to be worth around $35 million. Whoever had accumulated this collection either had excellent taste and terrible luck with dealers, or had deliberately mixed genuine pieces with forgeries to inflate perceived value. Either way, separating truth from deception was exactly the kind of work I'd trained for. Friday evening, I returned to the estate to find Dante waiting with an unexpected proposal. "I'm hosting a small gathering tomorrow night," he said over dinner. 6 people, business associates who appreciate art. "I'd like you to attend." The request surprised me enough that I set down my fork. "Why? Because you'll be an asset." These are people who collect art seriously, who'll be interested in the authentication work you're doing. Your presence demonstrates that I have expertise on staff, that I'm serious about legitimate art acquisition alongside my other enterprises. The phrasing was careful, acknowledging his criminal activities while framing the art collection as something separate, more respectable. I'm not a showpiece, I said, keeping my voice level. I won't stand there looking decorative while you discuss business. I'm inviting you to engage in conversations about art with like-minded individuals who share your interests. Dante's tone was reasonable but firm. You'll be introduced as my art consultant, which is technically accurate. You'll explore authentication techniques, market trends, and other topics of interest to art collectors. You're not decorative, Alexis. You're knowledgeable, and I'd like to leverage that expertise. When he framed it that way, as professional participation rather than objectification, it was harder to refuse. And if I say no, then you say no. I'm not going to force you, but I think you might enjoy it. When's the last time you had a conversation with someone about art who wasn't me or Mrs. Chen? The observation stung because it was accurate. I'd been isolated since the auction. My world narrowed to the warehouse, this house, and the man sitting across from me. The prospect of talking to other people, even if they were Dante's criminal associates, held an appeal I couldn't quite deny. Fine, I agreed. But I choose what I wear, I speak for myself, and if anyone treats me like property, I'm leaving the room. All reasonable conditions. He almost smiled. Mrs. Chen will provide options for attire. The gathering starts at 7. It's black tie, so formal dress is expected. The next day passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. I spent the morning at the warehouse, trying to focus on authenticating a problematic marine painting. But my mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. What would Dante's associates be like? Would they know how I'd come to be here? Would they care? Mrs. Chen had laid out 3 dresses in my suite, all designer labels, all stunning. I chose a deep navy silk that felt elegant without being revealing, paired with simple jewelry that looked expensive but not ostentatious. When I came downstairs at 7, the house had transformed. The formal living room I'd only glimpsed before was open and lit, arrangements of white flowers on every surface, staff circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Dante stood near the fireplace talking to a silver-haired man in an immaculate tuxedo, and when he saw me, something flickered in his expression, approval maybe, or appreciation. He excused himself from his conversation and crossed to meet me. You look beautiful. The compliment was straightforward, not loaded with innuendo or ownership. Thank you. I accepted the champagne a server offered, needing something to do with my hands. So do I just mingle, or is there a script for this? Just be yourself. He placed a hand lightly on my lower back, guiding me toward his guests. These people are art collectors first, business associates second. Talk about what you know. The first person he introduced me to was Evelyn Ashford, a woman in her 60s who owned galleries in New York and London. She engaged me immediately in conversation about authentication techniques for 19th century American landscapes, asking knowledgeable questions that required real expertise to answer. Within minutes, I'd forgotten to be nervous, lost in the kind of professional discussion I'd desperately missed. The evening continued in that vein. 6 guests, all wealthy, all connected to Dante's various enterprises, but all genuinely interested in art. We discussed market trends, debated the merits of different schools and periods, and argued about authentication controversies that had made headlines. Dante participated but didn't dominate, letting me take the lead in conversations, occasionally adding observations that revealed surprisingly deep knowledge. At one point, I found myself alone with him on the terrace, while the others examined a painting he'd hung in the living room. This is your world, isn't it? I said, gesturing back toward the house. Not the crime, but this. People who appreciate beauty, knowledge, and craft. Both are my world. He leaned against the terrace railing, his profile sharp against the night sky. The organization I run and the territory I control are both an inheritance and a responsibility. But the art, the collecting, understanding value beyond monetary worth, that's a choice. That's something I do because it matters to me. Why? The question came out softer than I'd intended. Why does it matter to you? Because it's one of the few things in my life that's purely about beauty rather than power. His answer was honest in a way that felt vulnerable. Everything else I do is strategic, calculated for advantage or defense. But standing in front of a painting that was created 200 years ago by someone who just wanted to capture light on water, that's not about power. That's about being human. The admission hung between us, revealing a dimension of Dante Carver I hadn't expected. This wasn't the calculating crime boss who'd bought me at an auction. This was someone who understood the difference between existing and living, between accumulating wealth and appreciating beauty. Before I could respond, Evelyn appeared in the doorway asking my opinion on the painting's attribution, and the moment passed. The gathering ended around midnight, with guests departing on promises to stay in touch. Several also asked for my professional opinion on pieces in their own collections. Dante walked them out while I stood in the living room, processing what had just happened. I'd spent the evening being treated like a professional, like someone whose knowledge and expertise mattered, by people who had no obligation to pretend respect they didn't feel. It was the first time since the auction that I'd felt like myself. Like Alexis Bennett, the art historian, rather than Alexis Bennett, the purchased property. "You were exceptional tonight," Dante said, returning to find me still standing there. "Every person here will remember you, and will want to work with you again. You've established yourself as someone valuable independent of your connection to me. That was deliberate on my part, letting you shine, but the shine itself was all you." I turned to face him. This complicated man who'd bought me and then given me opportunities to reclaim pieces of myself. "Why do you do this? Give me chances to prove myself? Treat me like a professional instead of property? What's the strategy behind it?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "There's no strategy, Alexis. Not everything I do is calculated for advantage." He moved closer, and I found myself unable to step back, held in place by something I didn't want to name. "When I bought you at that auction, it was a strategy. A message to the Bratva, a demonstration of resources, a political move. But somewhere between that night and now, you stopped being a chess piece and became a person I actually give a damn about." The admission should have terrified me. It should have triggered every warning bell about Stockholm Syndrome, captivity, and power imbalances too severe to overcome. Instead, I felt something warm unfurl in my chest, something dangerous that felt too much like hope. You can't just decide to care about someone you purchased. That's not how human emotion works. You're right, it's not. A slight smile touched his lips. Which is why I'm fairly certain I didn't decide anything. It just happened. Probably while you were lecturing me about Bierstadt's atmospheric perspective or arguing that my authentication timeline was unrealistic. You stopped being an acquisition and became someone I look forward to having coffee with every morning. This is insane. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warm night. "You know that, right? You can't develop feelings for someone you own. The power dynamic makes any real relationship impossible. I don't own you." His voice was firm but not harsh. "Legally, maybe. On paper that was filed with people who facilitate human trafficking. But in any meaningful sense, Alexis, you're your own person. You've proven that over the past week and a half. You set boundaries, you negotiate terms, you choose how you engage. That's not ownership. That's something else. What is it then?" I demanded that he name whatever was happening between us. Because from where I'm standing, I'm still here against my will. Still dependent on your goodwill for freedom. Still bought and paid for regardless of how we frame the daily interactions. He flinched slightly, the first time I'd seen him react with something like pain to words. "You're right. The circumstances of how you came here poison everything that's developed since, which is why I'm going to fix it." "What does that mean?" I asked, my heart suddenly racing. "Tomorrow, I'm meeting with the Bratva leadership. The political situation that necessitated your presence here as a symbol has been resolved. Versani is no longer a threat. Territories are settled, and my position is secure enough that releasing you won't be interpreted as weakness. I'm going to clear your father's debt completely and return all documentation that granted me any legal authority over you." The words took a moment to process. When they did, I felt something like vertigo, the ground shifting beneath my feet. "You're letting me go?" "Completely. Free to leave whenever you want. Return to your life. Pretend this nightmare never happened." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered in his expression. "Or you can stay. Finish the authentication work, because you're genuinely interested. Accept the position I'm offering as my permanent art consultant, and build something here that's yours by choice rather than circumstance. And if I stay," my voice came out barely above a whisper, "what happens between us? That depends entirely on what you want." He took a careful step closer, giving me space to retreat if I needed it. If you stay purely for the work, we maintain professional boundaries, and I respect that completely. But if you're feeling even a fraction of what I am, if somewhere in this impossible situation something real developed for you too, then we figure out what that looks like when you have actual freedom to choose. I should have said I needed time to think. I should have demanded that he arrange my departure immediately, get me away from this house and this man, and the confusing tangle of emotions that had developed against all logic and reason. Instead, I found myself asking, what are you feeling exactly? Be specific. Because I need to understand what I'm choosing between. Dante's expression softened in a way I'd never seen, the careful control dropping to reveal something raw underneath. I feel like the woman standing in front of me is the most interesting person I've spoken to in years. Like having coffee with you is the best part of my day. Watching you lecture on authentication techniques fills me with irrational pride, as you're truly brilliant at what you do. And like the thought of you leaving makes something in my chest physically hurt, which is not a sensation I'm accustomed to or particularly enjoy. The honesty of it, delivered without smoothness or charm, just blunt truth, broke through the last of my resistance. I should hate you. You know that, right? You participated in buying me at an auction. You brought me here against my will. Every rational part of my brain says I should despise everything about you. But you don't. It wasn't quite a question, more an observation. I'm not sure what I'm feeling. I pressed my palms against my eyes, suddenly exhausted. I'm angry at the circumstances, terrified of what it means that I've started looking forward to our morning conversations, and confused about how someone can be both my captor and the person who's given me more professional respect than I've ever received. You've created an impossible situation, Dante. I know, and I'm trying to make it less impossible by returning your freedom. He waited until I lowered my hands and met his gaze. Tomorrow you'll have documentation proving you're not under any obligation to stay. After that, anything that happens between us will be because we both choose it, not because circumstances forced us together. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the expensive bed in my suite, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of feelings that shouldn't exist. Stockholm Syndrome. That's what the rational part of my brain insisted. You've developed an attachment to your captor because he's shown you kindness, relative to the horror of being auctioned. It's a psychological defense mechanism, not real emotion. But it felt real. The way my pulse jumped when Dante entered a room. The anticipation I felt driving to the estate each evening, knowing we'd have dinner and conversation, was palpable. The warmth in my chest when he looked at me like I was someone valuable, someone worth listening to, someone who mattered beyond my usefulness. Those weren't survival responses. Those were feelings I'd have caught myself developing under any circumstances if I'd met him differently. The next morning arrived with sunlight and clarity I hadn't expected. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt like armor, and went down to breakfast. Dante was already there, papers spread across the table, his expression serious. "These are yours," he said without preamble, pushing a folder across to me. "Debt clearance documentation, return of any papers your father signed, and proof that legally you're completely free. The Bratva accepted the terms this morning." I opened the folder with shaking hands, scanning legal language that essentially said I was no longer anyone's property, no longer under obligation, free to leave and live my life without any interference. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing at a crossroads without a map. What happens to my father? The debt is cleared, same as yours. He's free to go, though I'd suggest he leave Boston, given how many people he pissed off during his gambling phase. I've arranged a position for him in Chicago, a legitimate job that could be enough to start over if he's smart about it. The consideration he'd shown, taking care of loose ends that would have left me worried and guilty, made my throat tight. "Thank you for all of this, for giving me back my life. You deserve to have it back." Dante's voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the tension in his shoulders. "So what now? Do you want Marcus to take you home? Can you help collect your things from the apartment? Make arrangements for wherever you want to go next?" I could leave, pack my few belongings, return to my tiny apartment, try to find another gallery job, pretend the past 2 weeks had been a fever dream. Return to a life that had been small and safe and lonely, where I struggled to pay student loans and never had conversations about art that challenged me intellectually. Or I could stay, could finish the authentication work that genuinely fascinated me, could accept the position he'd offered, build a career that used my skills in ways that mattered. Could explore these impossible feelings with someone who'd given me the freedom to choose him rather than forcing circumstances that eliminated choice. I need to complete the collection authentication process. The words came out steadier than I felt. I've completed 32 pieces, but 21 remain. Leaving now would mean abandoning work halfway through, which isn't my approach. Whether driven by professional pride or something else, I'd never been someone who left jobs unfinished. Dante's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment or hope, I couldn't tell which. Of course, take whatever time you need. The position remains open regardless of your decision about anything else. We can maintain completely professional boundaries if that's what you prefer. I'm not sure what I prefer. I met his gaze directly, refusing to hide behind politeness or deflection. 2 weeks ago, I was auctioned off like property. Now I'm having feelings for the man who bought me. Nothing about this situation makes sense, and I need time to figure out what's real versus what's trauma response, versus what's Stockholm Syndrome, versus what might actually be something worth exploring. Fair enough. He stood, gathering his papers with precise movements. Take your time, Alexis. There's no pressure, no expectation. You're free to leave whenever you want, free to stay as long as you need, and free to define what any of this means on your own terms. The warehouse felt different that day, knowing I was there by choice rather than obligation. The same paintings, the same authentication work, but the weight of captivity had lifted, leaving me lighter and somehow more uncertain. I worked through 3 more pieces, documenting findings with meticulous care, but my mind kept drifting to Dante's admission the night before, to the folder of freedom sitting in my suite, to the impossible choice between safety and something I couldn't quite name. Marcus drove me back to the estate that evening in silence, respecting whatever emotional processing I needed. When we pulled up to the house, I sat in the car for a long moment before getting out. This could be my last night here. I could pack my things, leave tomorrow morning, and never look back. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like a loss. Dante wasn't at dinner. Mrs. Chen informed me that he'd been called away on business and wouldn't return until late. I ate alone in that intimate dining room, feeling his absence like a physical thing, and realized with crystalline clarity that I was in serious trouble. You didn't miss someone you'd spent 2 weeks with unless something real had developed, something that transcended the circumstances of how you'd met. After dinner, I wandered through the house with new eyes, seeing it as a home rather than a prison. The art on the walls was carefully chosen pieces that reflected genuine taste rather than just expensive decoration. The library I'd discovered earlier in the week, full of books that had actually been read, margins annotated in Dante's precise handwriting. The small details revealed someone who valued beauty and knowledge, having built a life that encompassed more than just criminal enterprise. I found myself in his study without consciously deciding to go there, drawn by curiosity and the need to understand him better. The room was exactly as I'd seen it before, all dark wood and leather furniture, but now I noticed things I'd missed. Photographs on the bookshelf, Dante with an older couple who must have been his grandparents, the grandfather Mrs. Chen had mentioned. A younger Dante, dressed in a graduation gown, exudes pride in his expression. Evidence of a life before this, choices made and paths taken that had led him here. The desk held papers related to the collection, my authentication reports organized in a folder with his notes in the margins. He'd been studying them carefully, asking intelligent questions because he genuinely cared about the work, not just the profit it would generate. I picked up one report, noticing that he'd underlined my conclusion about a problematic Thomas Moran, and written "verify with secondary expert" in the margin. Thorough, careful, and treating my professional opinion with respect, while still maintaining appropriate skepticism. I shouldn't have been snooping. Should have left his private space and returned to my suite. Instead, I settled into the leather chair behind his desk, running my fingers over the smooth wood, trying to imagine what it was like to be Dante Carver. Inheriting an organization built on crime, maintaining power through calculated violence, but also collecting art because beauty mattered, reading philosophy in the margins of books, caring about authentication details and reports from a woman he'd met at an auction. The door opened quietly behind me. I turned to find Dante standing there, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something warmer. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." "I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about everything. I gestured at the room around us. Ended up here, trying to understand who you are beyond the man who bought me at an auction and the man who gave me freedom back. And what did you discover? He crossed to the bar cart, poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking, and handed me one before leaning against the desk beside where I sat. That you annotate books, which somehow surprises me more than it should. You have family photos, even though you've never mentioned your grandparents. That you actually care about the authentication work beyond just monetary value. My grandfather raised me after my parents died. Dante's voice was quiet, reflective. Taught me everything about running the organization, as well as literature, art, and philosophy. He believed that power without culture was just thuggery, that if we were going to operate outside the law, we should at least be educated enough to understand what we were choosing to exist outside of. Do you ever regret it? I asked, genuinely curious. The path he chose for you. The life you inherited instead of choosing. Every day. He took a long drink, staring at something I couldn't see. But I'm also good at it. And the people who depend on this organization need someone competent to run things. Walking away would mean abandoning hundreds of families whose livelihoods are connected to enterprises I control. That's not a choice I can make just because I'm tired of violence. The honesty of it, admitting exhaustion and regret without self-pity, made something shift in my chest. What would you do if you could choose differently? I'd probably do exactly what you're doing. He smiled slightly, meeting my gaze. I study art, work in authentication, and spend my days solving puzzles about brushwork and provenance, rather than managing territory disputes and supply chains. Build a life centered on beauty rather than power. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking whiskey, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, I set down my glass and stood, moving to where he leaned against the desk. I need to tell you something, and I need you not to say anything until I'm finished. Dante nodded, his dark eyes serious and focused completely on me. 2 weeks ago, I was sold a property at an auction. You bought me for $1 million, brought me here against my will, and became the person who controlled every aspect of my life. By any objective measure, I should hate you. I should be planning my escape. I should take the freedom you offered and run as far and fast as possible. I paused, making sure he heard what came next. But somewhere between authentication reports, breakfast conversations, and watching you be kind to Mrs. Chen and respectful about my professional expertise, I started having feelings that terrify me. Not because they're forced, but because they're real. Because I actually want to stay, finish the collection, and explore whatever this is between us when we're not bound by circumstances that made choice impossible. Dante's hand came up slowly, giving me time to pull away, and cupped my face with a gentleness that contradicted everything dangerous about him. Alexis, he said quietly, if you stay, it needs to be because you want this life, want me, not because you're afraid of starting over, or because gratitude is masquerading as affection. I need you to be absolutely certain, because if we do this, if we build something real, I'm going to fall completely. And I need to know you're falling too, not just landing because you don't see another option. I am falling. The admission came easier than I'd expected. Already fell, probably. Somewhere between being terrified of you and being fascinated by you. This is insane, probably unhealthy, and definitely complicated, but it's real. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Choosing to see where this goes when we're both making active decisions instead of reacting to a crisis. He kissed me then, and it was nothing like I'd imagined. Not possessive or aggressive, but gentle and almost questioning, like he was still giving me chances to change my mind. I kissed him back with all the confused certainty I felt, my hands finding his shoulders, his arms wrapping around me carefully. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. I need you to know something. His voice was rough with emotion. He rarely showed. Everything I said last night about caring for you, looking forward to coffee, and watching you work. That's not strategy or manipulation. I meant every word. You've become the best part of my days, and the thought of you leaving makes me realize how empty this house was before you came here. 6 months later, I stood in the same warehouse in South Boston, but everything had changed. The authentication work had been completed months ago, all 53 pieces documented, appraised, and prepared for sale through legitimate auction houses. Dante had made nearly $40 million from the collection, and I'd earned a reputation in art circles as someone who could handle sensitive authentication work with discretion and expertise. But I wasn't here for authentication today. I was here because this warehouse was undergoing a significant transformation. The space had been transformed into a gallery, my gallery, funded by Dante but operated independently under my name. Clean white walls replaced industrial concrete. Professional lighting illuminated carefully curated spaces. And the pieces hanging here were acquisitions I'd made myself, building a collection that balanced commercial viability with genuine artistic merit. Opening night was in 3 days, and I was simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. "You're nervous." Dante's voice came from behind me, and I turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, watching with that slight smile I'd come to love. "I can tell because you're rearranging pieces that were already perfectly positioned just an hour ago. I'm allowed to be nervous. This is my first solo exhibition, my first time putting my own taste and judgment on public display. What if everyone hates it? What if no one shows up? What if I've completely misjudged the market? Then we'll adjust and try again." He crossed to me, his hands settling on my shoulders with familiar comfort. "But that's not going to happen because you're exceptional at this. And everyone who matters in the Boston art world knows it. Evelyn Ashford has been telling anyone who'll listen that you have the best eye for 19th century American art she's encountered in decades. You're going to be fine." I leaned back against him, taking comfort in his solid presence. How did this become my life? 6 months ago, I was a gallery assistant struggling to pay rent. Now I own a gallery, have clients calling me for authentication work, and I'm living with a man I'm pretty sure I'm in love with, despite the absolutely insane circumstances of how we met. "It's surreal, are you?" His voice was quiet, almost tentative. "In love with me, I mean. You've never actually said it." I turned in his arms to face him, struck by the vulnerability in his expression. This man, who commanded an organization with absolute authority, negotiated territory disputes and managed criminal enterprises without visible stress, was nervous about whether I loved him. "I am completely, irrationally, impossibly in love with you." I cupped his face, making sure he saw the truth in my eyes. "I love that you annotate books and care about authentication details, treat Mrs. Chen with respect, and give me freedom to build something that's mine. I love your terrible jokes at breakfast and the way you listen. When I talk about brushwork analysis, like it's the most interesting thing you've ever heard. I love that you're trying to build exit strategies from the organization because you want a different life. I love you, Dante Carver, despite the fact that we have the world's most problematic origin story." His kiss was answer enough, deep and thorough, and full of promises about the future we were building together. When we finally broke apart, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was going to wait until after the opening to do this properly, with planning and romance. But since we're being honest about feelings, I should probably tell you that I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Inside the box was a ring, elegant and perfect, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that caught the gallery lighting and threw blue fire. "It's not an engagement ring," Dante said quickly. "Not yet. Not until I've fully extricated myself from the organization and can offer you a life that doesn't include looking over our shoulders. But it's a promise ring, a commitment that I'm working toward that future, toward being someone you can build a completely legitimate life with." I took the ring from the box, my hands shaking, and slipped it onto my finger, where it fit perfectly. "You researched my ring size too, along with everything else?" "Of course." He smiled, that real smile that transformed his entire face. "I'm thorough, remember? And I've been planning this since approximately the 3rd breakfast conversation we had, when you spent 20 minutes explaining why a particular Winslow Homer seascape was undervalued by the market. That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. We stood there in my gallery, surrounded by art I'd chosen, building a future neither of us had planned, but both of us were choosing every day. The past couldn't be changed. Dante had bought me at an auction, had brought me to his home under circumstances that would always be complicated and problematic. But the present was ours to define, and the future was something we were creating together through choice, commitment, and love that had developed despite every reason it shouldn't have. My phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn, confirming her attendance at the opening and bringing 3 collectors interested in American landscapes. Business was good, life was complicated, and I was happy in ways I'd never imagined possible 6 months ago. Sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances, and sometimes love grew in the spaces between trauma and healing, watered by genuine respect and careful trust. The opening would be successful. Dante would gradually transition power to his lieutenants, working toward the legitimate life he'd always wanted. We'd build something real together, something that honored where we'd come from while reaching toward something better. It wouldn't be easy, nor would it erase the problematic beginning, but it would be ours. Chosen, earned, and absolutely worth every complicated moment that had brought us here. I looked at the ring on my finger, then at the man who'd given it to me, and felt something settle in my chest. Peace, maybe, or acceptance, or just the certainty that sometimes the story you ended up living was stranger and more beautiful than anything you could have planned. They'd sold me to the most feared mafia boss in America, and he'd fallen for me despite never meaning to. I'd fallen back, despite every reason not to. And somehow, impossibly, we'd found something real in the wreckage of how we'd begun. That was enough. That was everything.